In the financial world, there are many risks to consider before we take any action. Let's take a look at some of the risks we face in the financial world. First is an operating risk. It is the risk by an organization's internal activities arising from people, systems, or processes. For example, a machine used in an operation was destroyed by a natural disaster disrupting an operation of the company. Second is the market risk. It is the risk of losses in positions arising from movements in the market price. For example, suppose you own a stock which is traded in the stock exchange. So there will be many people who will be buying and selling stocks in each day. So you are now subject to the fluctuation in the market price, and that is called the market risk. And our last example is the credit risk. It is the risk that a borrower might default on any type of debt by failing to make required payments. For example, suppose you give a loan to someone without asking for a collateral. On the day that borrower needs to make his payment, he does not have money to pay at all. So you'll be losing all your money, and this is called the credit risk. As you can see, there are only some of the risks in the financial world recently. However, liquidity risk has received special attention after the financial crisis. Let me now walk you through the introduction of the liquidity risks. Hamburger crisis was the biggest catastrophe of the banking systems since the 1930s, raising the question regarding the liquidity risks. Before the crisis, liquidity risk was unaware, and the financial models routinely omit the liquidity risks, since there is a protection from the reserve requirement. Distinctively, reserve requirements of Basel II was not defensive enough and lead to the downfall. Liquidity risk is one of the factors that caused the financial crisis since then. And we're all aware of it. Let me now tell you what exactly is the liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is the risk from the lack of marketability of an investment that cannot be bought or sold quickly enough to prevent or minimize a loss. There are two types of liquidity risks. First is funding liquidity risk, and second is market liquidity risk. Funding liquidity risk involves only one simple question, which is, can we pay our bill? So, what is the funding liquidity risk? It is the risk of not having an access to sufficient funds to make payment on time. Let's take a look at an example on how funding liquidity risk can play an important role on operation of the bank. Suppose we are having the individual that will first deposit money to the bank. The bank then will reinvest this money by giving out loans to individuals or corporates who need cash. At one point of time, the bank will get interest payment from this borrower, and the bank also needs to pay some interest to depositors. So the bank needs to anticipate the outflow of regular withdrawal and interest to match the inflow of the interest payment from the loan. It also needs to set up the reserve in case of emergency. During the political and financial crisis, people lose trust in the bank, so they will withdraw the cash simultaneously, and this will cause liquidity problem to the bank. The bank now does not have sufficient funds to make the payment, and for the worst case, this could end up into bankruptcy. As you can see, ignoring funding liquidity risks can lead to a devastating outcome. Therefore, it has to be carefully monitored and well managed. Let's now take a look at the market liquidity risk. It is an asset in liquidity or an inability to easily access the position. Let me give you an example. Supposing Mr. A and Mr. B both having the same amount of cash, let's say $1 million. Mr. A used up all his cash to invest in a 99.99% purity gold bar, while Mr. B invested in a property and land. And one day, both of them get sick, really sick. They don't have money to pay for the medical treatment. So now, how would they get the cash to pay for the bill? So they have to liquidate or cash out the investment. So the next question is, how easy is it to liquidate an investment? For Mr. A, he has a 99.99% purity gold bar, which is normally traded around the world. Thus, the price movement of the gold is based on the demand and supply around the world. So as of now, Mr. A can just trade his gold bar with the local shop for his cash. Isn't that easy? And now let's talk about Mr. B. Mr. B has a land with a property and a house. He would like to liquidate his house to get the cash. But the next question is, where to get a market price for the land? Mr. B has to benchmark the price of the property and the land nearby, or he could have professionals to evaluate the market price of his land and his property. However, the price is not really an issue. The real problem is, who is he going to sell it to? So the next question is, where can Mr. B find a customer to buy his property and how? A friend, a neighbor, or cousins? What if they don't want to buy? Post on the internet? Have the professional sell for you? If you're lucky, you'll have the cash after you sell it. But if not, you can't afford the medical bill and will die with your property. All in all, you can see that it is really easy for Mr. A to get the cash comparing to Mr. B. So this is why you need to consider liquidity risks before you put cash in investment. The outcome from ignoring the liquidity risks can be disastrous. However, there are several ways to mitigate the risks. Here are the ways that can be used to mitigate the funding liquidity risks. First, you can diversify over funding sources. Second, you have to hold enough liquid assets. Third, you can establish a contingency plan. And last, you can increase the amount of your reserve. And now, to mitigate the market liquidity risks, you can do two things. First is to hold enough liquid assets. And second, always keep in mind that the ability to liquidate the asset is as important as the value of the asset. Let me now wrap up for you. After the financial crisis, people are more aware of the liquidity risks. Basel III has improved reform measures to strengthen the liquidity risk management of the banking sector, as well as other risks. Thus, funding liquidity risks is more well monitored and well managed. For investors like us, we should consider which type of investment should we invest and allocate to make our cash sufficient for the upcoming events in life. that we are expected and not expected.